Hi, I'm Will Alexander, Maritime Autonomous Systems Lead at BMT. BMT is an international design, engineering, science and technology consultancy. I'm joined here today by Jesse and Matt, and we're here to talk about maritime autonomous systems and how it's going to affect the workforce of the maritime industry going forward. So if you could introduce yourself.
Of course. Hi, I'm Jesse Loynes. I'm a maritime autonomy systems consultant at BMT with a background in at-sea deployment, operations and manufacturing of uncrewed surface vessels.
Hi, my name is Matthew Smith. I'm a senior navigation and seamanship engineer for BMT, and I'm a master mariner with over 10 years of experience within the Royal Navy.
So we're facing a number of challenges where autonomy may be able to assist, particularly sustainability, operational efficiency and safety. So we're going to discuss some of these challenges today. How do we see autonomy supporting the industry in these challenges?
So I think maritime autonomy is able to address a number of these challenges, and I think over a varying timescale. Some will be very soon, some will be in a number of years' time. Notably, I think they'll be able to address the growing issue with regards to workforce in the maritime industry. By moving jobs from afloat to ashore, I anticipate that the market for watchkeepers, engineers will grow, especially as the industry is therefore able to employ and use people that previously might not have either been interested or able to operate at sea.
Yeah, it's opening up opportunities for a new range of new workers to get involved in the industry and many new capabilities, skills and knowledge actually to excel and take part.
Absolutely. And so Matt, you've got a huge amount of operational experience as a professional mariner, as well as a navigator, and you've operated ships from aircraft carriers down to smaller vessels. How do you see the fact that we're removing humans from platforms? How do you see that paying out in terms of how we operate and interact with other ships at sea that will have crew on them?
I think it's a really good question, and the million-dollar question. It's a challenge. There's numerous areas and factors that come into play, notably things like collision avoidance. And I'm thinking from a navigator's perspective, but of course there's a whole load of engineering considerations to factor in as well inside the vessel. From a navigation perspective, collision avoidance is governed by various international rules and regulations that will not be changed for the introduction of maritime systems into the wider maritime domain. And therefore, these systems need to be able to comply with the existing rules and regulations that are designed for crewed vessels with highly trained crewed operators. So actually, I think from a autonomy perspective, there'll be an interesting challenge, particularly for remote operation, in making sure that A, situational awareness is suitably addressed in remote operation centres, and B, that there isn't any downskilling in the knowledge levels of the individuals who are actually responsible for making these decisions. And for fully autonomous systems, they need to be able to, by and large, on the whole, make those calls correctly every time, with only very rare circumstances being referred back to a human operator.
Absolutely. So Jesse, what benefits do you think remote operations can bring? Matt's obviously talked about full autonomy there, where the machine is going to be making all the decisions. However, probably closer to where we are now is remote operation centres and actually removing the crew from vessels, and then obviously using a remote operations centre to control them. What benefits do you think that brings?
There are definite benefits there. Very much there's a lot of economic, financial and safety savings there, particularly when we're working either offshore or in hazardous conditions. As much as the primary purpose of a vessel might be to do the task you expect, the first thing it has to do is protect the crew who are on board and give them a safe environment either to work or to live as well for longer times at sea. Often that means that actually most of the vessel is put ashore to, or put over to looking after those crew, and the task of that vessel becomes very much secondary. We can often move to a system, particularly data collection, meteorological data collection at sea in particular, sensor arrays for something like that. Very, very simple, can run on a very low system. You can actually have huge savings in scale of vessel costs, crewing, and opportunities to stay at sea for much longer and work on that economy and collect data that either is impossible to collect normally or just financially non-viable.
So clearly lots of advantages there to removing crew, freeing up space to design vessels in a different way to make them fit for purpose. You mentioned, remote operations there. Matt, what are some of the pitfalls or things that challenges we need to be looking at addressing when it comes to remote operation centres?
Again, I think many of them haven't been fully explored or considered yet. They include situational awareness, as I've already mentioned, for both navigation and other systems. Ensuring that the infrastructure is suitable and suitably robust. So things like cybersecurity and also data bandwidth are going to be critical factors. Other considerations also include things that maybe seem initially out with the scope. So where is your ROC, and how is it complying with fire safety regulations, noise parameters, all those other factors that you wouldn't typically consider for a maritime bridge in the same way, but that you will have to consider for an ROC.
And just building on that, do you feel that the remote operations centre needs to be designed in consideration with the vessel and the platform that's being used as a single system? Because I think a lot of the time we're seeing platforms, vessels being looked at and the remote operation centres being something different, when actually, obviously, they're integral. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think especially at this stage in the maritime autonomy journey, I think bespoke ROCs for vessels has numerous benefits, particularly in demonstrating that they are safe to operate in conjunction with other crewed vessels on the seas. And obviously we have a period now where we're going through a sort of transition phase. I think in time, I see the business model probably changing, and actually companies, organisations may well offer remote operation centres as part of their offering and control numerous vessels from the same ROCs. But those ROCs will obviously have to be appropriately certified for the vessels they're controlling and suitably scaled so that actually you can adapt to the equipment fit that's on board the vessel you're controlling. So it's a challenge that I think is going to take some time to tease out. And actually, I think with the introduction first of regulation around maritime autonomous vessels, I think ROC regulation is yet to come after that. So we probably still have a long time to go before we really know how that's all going to shake down.
So it took, by some measures, around 200 years to go from sail to steam. We've talked about how quickly technology is moving, but do you think the maritime industry is moving quickly and transitioning to adopt new technologies? I mean, Jesse, you've been involved in the industry for a number of years. What are your thoughts on that?
There are definite sectors within the maritime industry that have been very, very quick to adopt sort of uncrewed vessels. I think the academic and scientific side has led that, particularly as an option to collect data that otherwise wasn't available to them. As we're seeing those sort of models develop and data collection be successful, it's starting to be adopted wider, particularly when there's greater financial considerations and, I suppose, reliability needed for a commercial basis to rely on what felt only recently like quite new technology, but is often now starting to become quite commonplace in use.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I'd follow up with that, which is that actually the relative lack of regulation in the maritime autonomy space at the moment, whilst a challenge for both vessel designers, operators, assurers, certifiers to all overcome, actually what it's allowed is a really innovative space for maritime autonomous designers, and in a positive way, a fail-fast approach mentality to be adopted. So, around the world, there are various different, test ranges and bodies of water where vessels can be put to sea and tested in a way that probably wouldn't be possible if there was a really well-established rule set with precedents backing it up. So actually, I think there are some opportunities that are being exploited with the current lack of regulation.
What are some of the concerns that operators are having when it comes to autonomous systems? We talked about shortage of skilled workforce, etc. at the start. Is it? Are they actually embracing it to help with workforce availability, or are they missing an opportunity there?
Yeah, I think they are, and I think actually we don't have to look forwards and project for this. We can look backwards. Increased autonomy within the vessels has already led to a reduction in crew size. If you look at a vessel of a coastal tanker, say 50 years ago, the crew size has dramatically reduced from, say, the dozens to maybe now only 6 or 7 people on board. And I expect to see that trend slowly carry on. The question is, which person of the crew is coming off when? Who's getting removed last? I think commonly people maybe think that it's going to be the master, i.e. the person with legal responsibility. I don't think we'll know the answer until it happens, but I would say that it may well actually be an engineer, someone to fault find the issues with the autonomous control system. And actually the master may well be ashore long before the engineers are, which may be surprising to some people.
Just to pick up on there, you talk about the master of the vessel. Do you believe, when we remove all the crew from ships, there still needs to be somebody who is designated as the master? Or as we move towards full autonomy, is that a role that kind of goes away?
I think so. I think particularly in maritime case law, the use of precedents, as with many other areas of the legal system, means that really it fails to operate in the setting without someone being legally responsible for the operation of the vessel. And you can take this further through to how vessels are flagged, where they're certified. There's going to be some areas which are going to be new and novel and some that aren't. And I think it's one of those areas where with the lack of regulation, people are referring back to what currently exists. And so we may well see an inadvertent carryover of existing models in that setting. I think the space where it might be different is the responsibility of what currently is an officer of the watch or an officer of the deck, becoming then an ROC operator. And I think you look at many remote operation settings, so remotely operated aircraft, for example, or instances of remote assets being used in conflicts around the world at the moment. And actually you see that the younger generation have actually much more relevant skill set to immediately apply to those situations, but perhaps not the same level of maritime training. So you could have a growth in the number of operators, but a slow reduction in masters that have the relevant experience. And I think that's going to be a challenge that the autonomy domain has to really sort of reckon with.
So I guess one example of where that's going is perhaps having one master who's maybe in charge of, a number of different vessels, and then operators underneath that layer as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think ROCs will be probably configured in due course, with numerous stations controlling numerous vessels from operators and a master overseeing it. And in a full autonomy setting, I expect largely those operators are in a monitoring and surveillance role. And when the vessel can't manage a situation on its own, it then defers back to the operator who, if required, will bring in the master. But it may mean that the master can look after a dozen vessels potentially, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how that all shakes out in due course.
Yeah, the concept of operations will develop as the industry develops. As Matt said, there's a structure in place at the moment between an officer on the bridge or the master who's on call as necessary, but obviously isn't omnipresent throughout every moment of a voyage. So we're still in a situation where in a remote operating centre, a master again would be available. And at the moment where we have an industry that mainly works by remote operation with human in the loop, we have a live operator and a master on call as support. In fact, they may be the same person, but someone suitably experienced and qualified to take responsibility and make the right calls. As autonomy feeds in, we may just end up with that master on call for a number of systems.
So just a final question from me then about training then to make sure our workforce is suitably skilled for the future. What are some of the key sort of training benefits or requirements that you see going forward, Matt, for this?
I think the first thing really that needs to happen is we need to really try and project exactly where we envisage autonomy going to drive that training needs analysis. I think remote operation from a navigation perspective is particularly novel. Actually, that slow transition towards autonomy in the engineering space has been happening over many years, and so actually many of the systems and processes are already in place. So I think there's going to be a body of training there, and I think watchkeepers are going to have to become more technologically minded than they already are. Already at sea, we operate with a range of different technologies, but actually understanding how that's being sent back to you in the remote operation center is going to be key. And I guess it's going to come really out of the decisions made at the highest levels of, for example, the IMO and the MCA as to what requirements in terms of responsibility the remote operators versus the masters are going to have, how well trained do they need to be, and how much we're relying on autonomy. And it may be that we see a slow change in the requirements. But I think remote operation is going to be, from a navigation perspective, is going to be a key area, really.
Yeah, I think historically, skills at sea, knowledge at sea have been very much tied together between that maritime knowledge and knowledge of operating the vessel. And they've been a very close pair. Now that we look towards remote operation, as Matt says, you may well find yourself separating how to operate the vessel, which becomes more of a technology issue, and sort of that basis, and the maritime operation of the vessel being a different skill set. The really exciting thing here is that then opens for the sort of market for a huge amount of diversity. And I think training will now start to involve a far wider section of the population. We've got many more open opportunities, and that's going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really positive thing, isn't it? It's kind of opening up the industry to more people, new jobs, different type of way of engaging with the maritime industry, which is really, really positive. So thank you very much for talking to me today. It's been really interesting.
Thanks, man.
Cheers, Will.